Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a case that is criminally under-discussed in Philly true crime. Everyone knows Gary Heidnik and his basement pit from the late 80s, but while the country watched him, a silent terror was stalking Northeast Philadelphia. For 5 straight years, a shadow hung over the neighborhood of Frankford between 1985 and 1990. Someone was systematically hunting women right under the L. The media called him the Frankfurt Slasher. His case has it all: a gritty atmosphere, a brutal pattern, and a massive controversy. Because by the end of this video, you're going to ask a very disturbing question. Did Philly actually catch a serial killer? Or did they sacrifice an innocent man to end a PR nightmare while the real monster walked free? Grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's talk about what happened under the L.
To understand this case, you have to understand Frankfurt in the late 1980s. It was a gritty, working-class, industrial neighborhood. At night, the bars along Frankfurt Avenue were packed, with locals trying to escape the daily grind. But if you were a woman walking home alone from those bars after midnight, you were walking into a hunting ground. The killer had a very specific type, a specific target, and a terrifyingly precise way of operating. He targeted middle-aged women, mostly vulnerable, some struggling with homelessness or alcohol, who frequented the local dive bars. He would wait for them to leave alone, stalk them into the dark alleys or secluded lots just off the main avenue, and then brutally stab and slash them to death. Let's name the victims because their names deserve to be remembered, not just buried in a police archive. First was Helen Patent, 51 years old. The nightmare begins on August 19, 1985. Helen's body is found in a secluded spot off Frankfurt Avenue. She had been brutally stabbed multiple times. The neighborhood is shocked, but the police treat it as an isolated, late-night street crime. They had no idea it was a prologue. Just a few months later, on January 3, 1986, the killer strikes again. 67-year-old Anna Carroll is found dead inside her own home, not far from the avenue. The sheer brutality of the stabs and slashes matches Helen's murder perfectly. Then comes Susanna Olsev, 64 years old. It's Christmas Day, 1986. While families are opening gifts, Susanna's body is discovered. The holiday season is shattered by the realization that a predator is actively moving through the neighborhood unnoticed. The timeline begins to compress. On January 8, 1987, 28-year-old Jean Durkin is found murdered. Less than 2 weeks later, 29-year-old Catherine M. Jones is discovered. Now, Catherine's inclusion is heavily debated by modern investigators because her cause of death leaned closer to strangulation, but her body was dumped right in the same geographic radius during the absolute peak of the panic. After a brief cooling-off period where the killer goes to ground, the violence roars back. On November 11, 1988, 66-year-old Margaret Vaughan is found cut down in the same exact signature style. And just 2 months after that, on January 19, 1989, 30-year-old Teresa Scortino is brutally taken. By now, the neighborhood is in absolute gridlock. Women refuse to walk to the corner store alone. The bars are emptying out early. The local papers are screaming about a serial killer, and the pressure on the Philadelphia Police Department is reaching a boiling point. Enter the detectives. The main investigators tasked with cracking this nightmare were Philadelphia homicide detectives like John Jack King and Manuel Santiago, men working under an intense citywide microscope. The community wanted blood, the mayor wanted answers, and the cops were coming up empty-handed. Every single time a body was dropped, the police searched for a common denominator. Finally, they got a break from eyewitnesses, multiple people who had been at the bars or near the transit stops on the nights of a few of these murders came forward with a consistent description. They saw some of the victims talking to or walking away with a middle-aged white man. In a couple of instances, witnesses described him as having a neat appearance, almost looking like a local preacher or a church-going guy. In police files, he became known simply as the Minister. The cops poured over the neighborhood looking for this white male suspect. But then, on April 29, 1990, victim number 8 is found. Her name was Carol Dode, 44 years old. Her body is discovered in a gruesome scene in an alleyway directly behind a business called Newman's Seafood, a local fish market right on Frankford Avenue. She had been severely mutilated and stabbed to death. Because her body was found literally on the property of the fish market, detectives immediately turned their focus to the people who worked there. And that's when they zeroed in on a 30-year-old employee named Leonard Christopher.
The police had a body in the alley of the fish market. Immense political pressure, and they zeroed in on Leonard Christopher. Now, let's talk about Leonard's background, because this changes everything. He was a quiet, low-profile guy, worked grueling hours processing fish, and had no history of crazy violence. There was one glaring, unmistakable detail that separated him from the killer the police had been hunting for 5 years. Leonard Christopher was black. He absolutely looked nothing like the middle-aged white man eyewitnesses had been seeing with the victims. He didn't fit the profile, and he didn't fit the sketches. But the city needed a win, and the cops decided he was their guy.
On May 5, 1990, Leonard Christopher is officially arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Carol Dode. Now, you would think if you're going to charge a man as an alleged serial killer, or at least link him to this horrific string of crimes, you'd have a mountain of forensic evidence, right? Bloodstains, DNA, fingerprints, a murder weapon. They had absolutely none of it. When the case went to trial later that year, the prosecution's strategy was built entirely on a house of cards made of circumstantial evidence and incredibly shaky witness testimony. Let's look at the key pieces of that courtroom drama. First, the sighting testimony. The prosecution called an eyewitness who claimed they saw Leonard Christopher walking with Carol Dode near the alleyway shortly before she was estimated to have died. The defense tore into this, pointing out how dark the area was and how the witness' story had shifted wildly during police interrogations. Second, the absolute lack of forensics. The defense kept hammering the same crucial point over and over. Where's the blood? Carol Dode's murder was incredibly messy, an absolute bloodbath. Leonard Christopher had been arrested shortly after, and police had searched his home, his clothes, and his locker at the fish market. They had zero physical evidence linking him to the mutilation. No blood from Carol Dode was ever found on his person or his belongings. And finally, the serial killer elephant in the room. The state technically only tried Leonard for one murder, Carol Dode. They couldn't link him to the other 7 victims with even a shred of evidence. But the prosecution heavily implied to the jury that by locking up Leonard Christopher, they were putting an end to the entire Frankfurt slasher nightmare that had kept their city hostage for half a decade. The jury, exhausted and terrified by years of horrific headlines, bought it. In December 1990, Leonard Christopher is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The police department held a press conference. The city took a collective sigh of relief. The Frankfurt slasher was behind bars. The nightmare was finally over. Except, it wasn't.
Just a few months after Leonard Christopher is locked up, the monster strikes again. On September 6, 1990, the body of 30-year-old Michelle Denner is discovered. She was found inside an apartment just off Frankford Avenue, and when the medical examiner performed the autopsy, the room went completely cold. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed, and brutally killed. It wasn't just a random murder, it carried the exact, highly specific, identical forensic signature of the Frankfurt slasher. Every cut, every slash, the location, the profile, it was an absolute match.
This sent shockwaves through the legal system. Think about the math here. Leonard Christopher is sitting in a maximum security prison cell. He has an airtight alibi for Michelle's murder because he is literally under 24/7 armed guard by the state. He physically could not have done this. If Michelle Denner was killed by the Frankfurt slasher, it meant the real killer was still out there, walking up and down Frankfurt Avenue, laughing at the police. It meant the cops had thrown a black fish market worker in a cage just to satisfy the media. So, how did Detective Jack King and the Philadelphia Police Department handle this absolute disaster? They did something completely shameless. They immediately came out to the press and ruled Michelle Denner's murder a copycat killing. They claimed that some random person in Philly had read through details in the newspapers to perfectly replicate a serial killer's highly specific forensic signature and just happened to execute it in the exact same neighborhood while the suspected killer was in jail. They refused to reopen the case. They refused to look at Leonard Christopher's conviction. They closed ranks, doubled down, and let the life sentence stand. Leonard Christopher was transferred to a state penitentiary to serve out his life sentence. From the day he was handcuffed to the day he drew his last breath, he maintained his absolute innocence. He repeatedly stated that he had nothing to do with Carol Dode. He certainly had nothing to do with the other women who lost their lives under the L. Ultimately, Leonard Christopher never got his freedom or his name cleared. He ended up developing cancer while behind bars and died in prison, leaving the case in a permanently broken state. Today, if you look at the official record books, Carol Dode's murder is technically listed as solved, but the other 8 women, Helen, Anna, Susanna, Jeanne, Catherine, Margaret, Teresa, and Michelle, their murders are still officially listed as unsolved cold cases. The real Frankfurt slasher, the middle-aged white man seen in the shadows by the train tracks, was never caught. He likely lived out the rest of his life in total anonymity.
What do you guys think? Do you think Leonard Christopher was somehow involved in that single murder? Or do you think he was completely set up by the desperate police department? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into forgotten true crime. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there.